I've been on the police for about 15 years. I've been involved in major critical incidents before. And I think after every single one of them, I've always have to second guess myself saying, how could I have made that better? Mm-hmm. How could I have made this perfect? Mm-hmm. Maybe if I just hadn't stopped that car, if I just would have used this other tactic, then that situation may not have presented itself, or it would have ended in a much quicker, more decisive manner.
Well, Keith, in the 4 milliseconds that you had, why didn't you make a better choice?
That is a good question, Your Honor.
Exactly. Hello, everyone. My name is Jared Altick, and I'm a chaplain with the police department. The Hey Chaplain podcast is the place where members of the law enforcement community can share their wisdom and experience through me, the chaplain, so that they can encourage others who wear the badge. Today we're talking about use of force and the experience of going through a critical incident where force is used. These areas are regularly misunderstood by outsiders. So one of my goals here is for you to hear use of force explained to an outsider like me so that you can better explain it when you're on the hot seat and someone is asking you, why did a cop use such and such level of force? My guest today is Captain Keith Falkner. I picked him because he has quite a bit of personal experience with critical incidences, but also because he helps train officers in our department on the use of force. Listen closely as Keith sprinkles in a bit of his own first-hand experience right after a violent encounter and shares wisdom about how much to involve your family in the healing process. Here is Keith Falkner. Welcome back, Keith. How are you today?
I'm doing great.
Excellent. So I want to talk about use of force, and I know that you teach defensive tactics and other things. Can you tell me what kind of things? Give me the rundown. What kind of things do you teach cops?
Well, I'm not stationed at the academy, but I go there often for training new recruits, lateral officers, and for annual training for officers.
Okay. So like in-service kind of stuff?
Yes.
All right. And so what do you teach? I know you teach defensive tactics.
Defensive tactics is a realm that covers quite a bit. I cover everything from handcuffing to teaching them the legal justifications for that. I also teach ground fighting, taser, pepper spray, baton. I also do active shooter training and some field training stuff for when they get released from the academy and onto the streets.
Okay. Do you have a favorite among those?
It's always fun to watch people get pepper sprayed.
That's interesting. I've always really appreciated that cops, at least once, they get pepper sprayed, they get tased, they go through all of those things themselves. And so, although I've never heard of cops getting shot with beanbag rounds.
No, there's a lack of volunteers for that one.
That's awesome. So tell me about the teaching of use of force. Maybe we should kind of run down what a typical use of force continuum is, because some people listening to this may not understand. So what does that continuum look like?
When we do uses of force, most agencies across the world, follow the same guidelines on use of force. You always want to use, enough force to accomplish the objective, but you want to use the least force to accomplish the objective.
Right.
So you don't want to go under the level of force, but you also don't want to overdo it as well. So you have, it's broken down into two big categories. You have levels of resistance and levels of control. Okay. The levels of resistance is what the offender does, the suspect. And that starts with intimidation, the glaring fists, the combative stance. And then it could escalate from there from, hey, I'm not doing what you're told. I'm running away. You're not taking me to jail tonight.
Right.
Then it can go up to, hey, I'm just going to hold on to this, object and refuse to put my hands behind my back. Or if it escalates from there, it could be running away from the officer. You're not trying to hurt anybody, but I just don't want to go to jail tonight.
Right.
Then we start escalating it even more from the suspect's point of view. And now they're starting to attack the officer. Mm-hmm. I don't want to just go away, but I'm going to cause physical harm to that person, punch, kick, or the officer.
Bite.
Yeah. Punch, kick, bite. And then sometimes that could be done in a, I'm going to punch this officer, then run away. And sometimes it could just be, I'm going to punch this officer because I don't like him. Mm-hmm. And then the highest category is obviously lethal force assaults against officers.
One of the things I think people have misunderstood, I feel like I've seen in the news a lot recently, is when a suspect is fighting a cop and they grab a taser. I think a lot of people kind of shrug at that. People who are not in law enforcement, they kind of shrug at that and they go, well, they just grabbed a taser. What's the big deal? What is the big deal?
Well, with any weapon, as soon as they grab a weapon, that weapon you have to assume can be used right back at you. Mm-hmm. They could grab something like a baseball bat. Well, that can cause serious harm to you. Well, so can a taser used to the point where I can incapacitate that officer and then steal their firearm as well and completely immobilize you and kill you while they do that.
Yeah. What about the use of force continuum for the officer?
So officers, we have this. We have the same kind of control levels. We start out with just the mere presence of an officer. Everyone knows when the officer's nearby, they're like, okay, I gotta mind what I'm doing. The officer's there. Yeah. That's called just officer presence. If you show up, you're in uniform. Most people, whatever they were doing, even if it's slightly legal, are going to be like, okay, I'm done. So that's the basic level of control. The next level up is verbal control. The officer just, hey, I want you to do this. Mm-hmm. If you refuse to do that, as long as the officers knows what they're doing, could be a lawful violation.
Okay. You have to obey the officer.
Yes.
Right.
Then it goes up from there to I'm going to have to put my hands onto that person. Now that doesn't mean I'm going to go up and punch them right away. It's more along the lines I'm going to go up there and physically move their hands behind their back, or just remove them from that particular situation and location.
Okay, so you're trying to control their hands, but you've told me before that when you're training recruits, that there's a barrier there. There's something that psychologically the person training to be a police officer has difficulty with this level?
Yeah, this is unnatural for most people. Most people, they get told their whole lives in kindergarten all the way up through their, when they're adults, keep your hands to yourself. We've all heard it 1,000 times. And just because someone gets a job as a police officer and they go into the academy, that rule still applies.
Right.
21 years of their life, they've been told to keep your hands to yourself. And now we're telling you, hey, put your hands on a total stranger.
Right.
This is
who doesn't want it.
Yeah.
Right.
Who's telling you, no, I don't want to do what you say.
Yeah.
And not to mention that person's, aggressive. They're fighting. It could escalate beyond that. So teaching officers to physically put their hands on someone else is a hard subject to teach, but it's a necessary one. We have to say, so then we go into some of the legal aspects of that. Is it lawful to touch them at this point? Are they under arrest? And if they are, then we can touch them. But we also occasionally will throw scenarios at the officers of, hey, we're going to put you in this situation. I want to see if they knew that they are not allowed to touch this person in this scenario. So it's a lot of legal and physical mental games going on with the officer.
Yeah. So you're moving up the continuum, and at this point you're trying to control the hands of the individual. You're trying to control their body, where they're positioned, and that kind of thing. Where do you go from there?
So then we jump it up to what we call as hard empty hand techniques. That's more your striking. Could be some sort of strike or kick. Okay. That would be usually used on someone who's actively fighting against you, or you've tried a lower level of control and that just is not working.
Where do batons and nightsticks, where do those come in? Are they there yet?
No, that's
this is still empty hand.
This is empty hand. This is me. I'm trying to if I have to tackle you to the ground.
Okay.
I couldn't. Merely grabbing you was not effective. You're running away. I've got to physically grab you and throw you down to the ground. Okay.
Are you teaching types of like MMA kind of restraints? Are you teaching pressure points?
We do teach all that. We teach pressure points. We teach ground fighting. We're even starting to dabble in some jiu-jitsu.
Sure. Have you just had recruits get to amped up. They're just a little too excited.
Oh yeah, we all have like 21-year-old kids, and they're trying to show who's the toughest. Some of them just came out of the military, and they're going to go on the ground onto the mats. They're going to go 100%, and sometimes they go well past what they should. And as the instructors, we got to jump in and say, okay, that's enough. We don't want you to actually break someone's arm.
Right.
We don't want to sprain an ankle here in training. This is just training.
Right. The classes are already small enough. We don't have extra
Don't want to
recruits
lose
just
someone.
waiting. Right.
That'd be like a terrible fear of mine, is to lose a recruit due to a knee being blown out.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. So this is much more aggressive controlling of someone. Something that could leave bruises. Something that could could hurt them.
The expected outcomes for this are bruises and contusions. That's actually one of our test questions.
Okay. Okay. Where do you go from there?
So then we go up to the intermediate weapons. Everyone knows this as the taser, the pepper spray, and the baton.
Okay.
Those are usually you're using some sort of a tool to give you the added advantage to overcome that level of resistance.
Why are those tools in a different category than the hard hand techniques?
Because they are a higher level of control. You can kicking someone with my foot, I'm not going to leave the type of bruise that I could if I hit you with a baton.
Yeah, yeah.
Same with taser. I'm going to lock your body up and you're going to fall over.
Yeah, yeah. There's a higher chance of something really bad happening.
Therefore,
there's more rules.
The higher the level of control, the higher the risk of injury to both the officer and the offender.
Okay. And from there, obviously the next step would be
deadly force.
Okay. And so that would typically focus on the firearm that the officer carries.
But not limited solely to the firearm. If you use the baton inappropriately and you're hitting someone in the head, you're at lethal force.
Oh, of course. Yeah.
If you're tasing someone inappropriately on purpose, that could be lethal force. Or we also occasionally you'll see some officers use vehicles in deadly force encounters.
Yeah, yeah. What if you tase someone hanging from the side of a building?
Well, that is a topic we will never teach. That is a bad topic.
Yeah, I can't imagine in your training the kind of things you have to spell out and be like, you can never apply this technique in this situation, or this one, or that one. I can't imagine what you have to deal with.
Yeah, we have to cover all those topics. Each one of those classes is a full day. Taser is a full day class.
Yeah.
Pepper spray is a full day class.
Yeah.
And so these officers are getting 8 hours of training in just that one intermediate weapon. Baton is usually a full day. Sometimes it can go a little bit longer than that.
Really. Yeah.
We have to tell them target areas they have to hit, and only to hit soft tissue, not to hit bones, not to hit skulls, and things like that.
Has anyone ever just pepper sprayed themselves? Has anyone ever tased the person holding the target?
I'm trying to. Not really. We do it in such a manner that it'd be very difficult for
someone to screw it up that badly.
Yes. On pepper spray, when we've had the recruits out at the academy, we've had instructors sometimes spray the recruits with pepper spray, and there's always a little bit of mist that flies back.
Sure,
and
that back spray or whatever.
Yes, and we're running through it with a cell phone trying to record the incident for their academy video, and sure enough, you're going to get that overspray right in your eyes as you're running. And as the instructor, you're like, I know this is what's going on.
Right,
and,
right.
And so sometimes that just happens that, even as the instructor's getting a little bit of the pepper spray in their eyes.
The sacrifices that are made for the recruit graduation video. Right.
Yes.
That's
We've
awesome.
had it before where the recruit ran all the way through the course, got to the part where they're grabbing the radio and they're yelling for help, and they can't get out anything other than, hey, this really hurts. I'm at the academy. This hurts. All what you said is, it meets the minimum qualifications. You said what you needed. hey, this hurts. Someone's going to come to you, and you said your location.
Hey,
that's
success.
The bare minimum qualifications right there. Now, I think they actually said it in a little bit more colorful manner, but that was what was broadcasted on the radio. And the thing is, when we're using those, we're using live radios.
Yeah.
So someone could have actually heard that.
Right. That's great. When you're training people, everything from really the hard hand techniques on up, have you seen unhealthy attitudes about receiving this training? It seems to me like they could go one direction or the other. Have you seen some of that?
Most what we'll see is it's hard to duplicate and replicate the fear that a real life encounter will bring. No matter how realistic I'll try to make the training at the academy, it's impossible to have that officer think in 3 seconds I could be dead.
Right.
And
so it still feels like football practice. It still feels like sparring in the gym. It doesn't feel like real life, and you maybe never can achieve that.
I think that's every training goal of everybody ever, but it's an impossibly difficult task to hit.
So you're going to have some people who are just enjoying it because maybe they played contact sports or they boxed or did MMA or whatever it may be. They just enjoy the physicality of it, and maybe they're enjoying it a little too much, but that's probably not unusual because again, it's only training. It's not deadly serious. It's hard to make it deadly serious.
Yeah, like I said, it's hard to have the officer have that fear of I'm not going home if I don't solve this problem or get out of it or neutralize that threat, I could die.
What about trainees that are on the opposite end, maybe not taking it seriously enough? Have you seen that very much?
Most of the time when we get someone that's not, going through all the motions, they just, or maybe it goes back to the hesitation to put their hands on someone. Okay. They're having a hard time engaging a violent person. Cops have a very special type of personality where they're okay with engaging violent people to protect the innocent.
Right.
That's why a lot of them got the job, but all the officers are not cookie cutter.
There's a wide variety.
Yes. Some will have no problem at all running in there and engaging in a gunfight, and some will have a hard time going to put their hands on somebody.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. However, deadly situations where you're getting up to the end of the continuum where there is lethal force involved, that doesn't just pick those situations. Don't just pick the SWAT team members and the veteran patrol officers. Any officer could find themselves in that scenario.
Yes.
And so they all need to be trained for it. They all need to be mentally prepared for it. We're talking about it escalating both from the suspect side and from the officer side, but it can go back the other direction, right?
Yes, the suspect can resist at a very high level, and then they can instantly turn right around and surrender.
Right.
And the officer's got to know that, hey, I was just in a potentially life-threatening encounter. Now he wants to surrender. I got to bring it back down. And then they go to handcuff this person. Suddenly that person produces a knife. So now we'll go back up.
Right.
And it's a constant fluid levels. Those levels of control and resistance both go up, and they can both go back down pretty quickly.
How much wiggle room is there legally? I mean, we're watching these videos, body-worn cameras and everything else, and we're judging it in slow motion. How much can an officer reasonably ratchet it up and ratchet it back down?
So that brings up a great point. It's Graham versus Connor. It's a Supreme Court case. It talks about the use of force must be objectively reasonable from the eyes of the officer at the time that the use of force was encountered. We'll see that a lot with the media where they'll bring in body camera footage and they'll slow it down and be like, well, why didn't you think about this? Or why didn't you do that? Well, the media doesn't understand Graham versus Connor, and they don't understand that you have to, that officer only knows what they know in that quarter of a second. During a critical incident, your heart rate spikes. You have a sympathetic nervous system dump, an adrenaline dump, and your blood vessels constrict. Your heart rate jumps up significantly, your body's trying to get into this fight mode. And when you do that, you're pulling blood away from your extremities. Your heart, your lungs, and your organs are taking all that oxygen and all that blood.
It's all going to the core.
Yeah, we've all heard about losing our fine motor skills during an incident.
Yeah.
And what's happening is your body is literally taking away the blood from your fingertips and not allowing you to make those fine motor skills. And so you have to do gross movements and gross motor skills because that's all your body can manage. So during a use of force, your adrenaline dumps, you go way up, you're in the combat mode. Your body is saying, I'm ready for a fight, I'm going to win this. As your heart rate and body goes up, you start producing adrenaline, and your body in your mind changes the way its thought processes work. And you have to make a decision that can make or break if you live, die, go to jail.
Yeah. Because if that officer believes he is about to die or someone else is about to die, that matters as far as judging them after the fact.
Yes. Well, the media doesn't care.
No.
But the courts actually do have precedent, and Supreme Court cases in case law back up the officer as being judged at the time that the use of force occurred with what they knew at the time.
Right.
As soon as that threat diminishes, that suspect's in custody, the fight's over. It could take seconds or it could take a couple minutes.
But then all sorts of weird things start happening to you.
Your body starts going into a parasympathetic backlash. These are all scientific terms. And,
right.
But they're in the textbooks that I've had to read, and I teach this to the new students.
So what does that look like? What happens to you?
So everybody has a slightly different one. It kind of mimics shock.
Okay.
Is what the symptoms of shock if you're a medical professional. But your heart rate slows down. You start having your veins start opening back up. You're having a blood pressure loss. You can start sweating, cold sweats. You start having muscle tremors, so your hands could shake tremendously. During some of my critical incidents, I remember being cold. And it wasn't cold outside.
Right.
I was shivering.
But you felt cold.
Oh, I was shivering all over. I couldn't get warmed up enough. My body was shaking so much that
like you were in shock.
Yeah. And I didn't realize that I was having such a backlash from the adrenaline dump that it just took a few minutes for my body to come into homeostasis, that natural level of
leveling out.
Yes, where my heart rate needed to be, where my adrenaline was resetting.
Right, but in the meantime, you can't function.
No, I got drugged down the street by a car a couple hundred feet, and was involved in a shootout. And I was laying there helpless on the road, and I was trying to, once the ambulance came and the situation was already over.
Right,
I was trying to dial my wife on the phone. My fingers wouldn't work.
Yeah.
And what was happening is I was having such bad muscle tremors, I couldn't dial the actual number. So I had to hand my phone to someone and say, hey, can you please call my wife and let her know I'm okay?
Yeah.
Those are all things that happen. And so when we talk about to the new recruits, we distinctly go into the psychological effects and the physiological effects of a use of force, because during a critical incident, your brain is operating at a different level. Mm-hmm. You're all hyped up that going into there, you don't know if you're going to live or die, and your body's trying to is trying to protect itself, and then coming back down is a whole nother ride.
And then knowing this, does that help some, knowing it in advance or knowing it afterward?
That's why we teach them to it before, so they can recognize and understand those effects, and that
there's nothing wrong with me. This is normal.
Yes.
Right.
And I'll tell them stories about where I've had, not just on critical incidents. I've had regular uses of force where I just, some guy was trying to run from me on a bicycle and I tackled him. Mm-hmm. I remember, fighting and cuffing that guy up and going back to my car, and I was just shaking uncontrollably because I was cold.
Yeah. I would want an officer to know that is a normal physiological response. There's nothing wrong with you. Don't let self-doubt creep in and everything else. This is how your body responds to this kind of work, and that's a normal thing for you.
Yes, and that's why we teach that.
What kind of self-doubts and negative thinking creep in? after a use of force?
Self-doubts are, did I just do something that was legal? Am I going to get in trouble for this? Those are before, even if you were in the most justified shootout ever, you're still going to have self-doubts. If you're going to think, oh gosh, did I just kill someone? Am I going to jail?
Yeah. Did I just end my career?
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, every officer that's been in a use of force has those thoughts.
Yeah.
And it's terrifying to go through.
Yeah. Even if you do everything by the book, you did it exactly as you were trained, you are totally within policy, you're still going to have those self-doubts.
Yes, because that would be natural to do.
So when an officer kills somebody in the line of duty, that is a homicide,
Yes.
but it's not necessarily murder.
No, potentially falls under a special category called justifiable homicide.
Okay.
And we do teach that with the difference between killing and murder. Murder's done with malice and ill will and evil thinking.
Yeah.
Killings could range from
Accidental.
accidental,
Yeah.
but there's accidental killings, which are truly just accidents. That is not murder. And then there's accidents where are done recklessly, which
You may have some responsibility there.
you will have some legal responsibility, but morally your intent was not there. And then you have, some killings which are done justified and were absolutely appropriate to the situation.
Like protecting a third party or even protecting yourself.
Yourself or someone else.
When an officer takes a life, is there any amount of training that can prepare every single cop to handle this well?
No. The short answer, no. Some of them are going to be perfectly fine and will never really think about it after that day. And and it really depends on the situation.
Yeah.
But in some, even in the most justified situations, an active shooter at a school where you had an evil person trying to hurt children, and you go there and you have to be the one to neutralize that threat, and yet that could just eat you up inside for your entire life.
Yeah.
And there's no amount of training we can do to screen for that and to weed out until that actually happens.
Yeah. As a chaplain, I've never known for sure how to approach someone who has been in a lethal use of force, because I don't want to treat them all like they're damaged, like they all have PTSD. That's the mistake I feel like happens with a lot of military veterans, is they're all treated like they're fragile and they're about to fall apart. Well, that's not true. Some of them have PTSD. Some of them have a post-traumatic stress injury. Some of them don't. Some of them were very resilient and handled it very well. And same thing with cops. I've had cops that I've had in my church or as a chaplain where they took someone's life, but it was completely justified. They basically shrugged it off. It did not wound them deeply to participate in that. They regret it. They wish they didn't have to, but they're like, hey, that guy made his choice, and I had to be there to stop it.
Yeah, that's very true. We've had some people gone through there and had a critical incident, and they never thought about that again. And some that it bothers them forever.
Yeah, well, that's just it. There's some that are prepared, they're trained, they're ready their whole life to do this, and then it actually happens, and it deeply wounds them. And they're not themselves, and there's all these symptoms, and there's a moral injury that happens, and there may be post-traumatic stress injury, and there's all this stuff that happens, and their normal life is completely derailed because it just, the way it hit them, that particular situation, their particular frame of mind, just that perfect combination did not work. And it's a bad experience for them. You can't ever know that you're fully prepared, but what kinds of things do need to be considered, like in the days immediately after a use of force incident?
So after use of force, they're going to think about that over and over and over again. It's going to be one of those scenarios you're going to replay in your mind 1,000 times. And you're going to sleep on it and replay it the next day. But it eventually goes away or lessens.
Yeah.
In the days after use of force, you're going to have the overwhelming desire to tell people about it, want to talk to people and replay that story. But like you said, you just committed a homicide.
Yeah. It's probably not smart to just talk to everybody.
No,
right.
I'm not a lawyer, but my legal advice would be don't talk to people.
Right.
People don't even know that, like, don't go out and try to self-medicate by taking alcohol. That's not going to lead to a good outcome.
No.
You should go home, get back on your normal routine. Whatever you're going to do that night, go back and do it. If you're going to go to the gym, go to the gym. If you're going to have family movie night with your kids, have family movie night with your kids.
Yeah, that's going to be hard, though, because you've got all of the chemicals in your brain bouncing around after that sudden, violent encounter. You are replaying it, thinking, well, how could I have prevented it? How could I have done it better?
I've been on police for about 15 years. Yeah, I've been involved in major critical incidents before. And I think after every single one of them, I've always have to second guess myself saying, how could I have made that better? How could I have made this perfect? You know, maybe if I just hadn't stopped that car, if I just would have used this other tactic, then that situation may not have presented itself, or it would have ended in a much quicker, more decisive manner.
Well, Keith, in the 4 milliseconds that you had, why didn't you make a better choice? Right?
That is a good question, Your Honor.
Exactly. Yeah. So you're second guessing yourself. You're going through all of those things, but you're suggesting that, you know, getting back into normal routine with your health, your eating, your sleeping, your family, that is a healthy move.
That is the correct way to handle a situation like that. Anything else could be self-destructive. Getting out of your routine is going to throw you off even more.
Yeah.
And it's going to affect your sleep even more.
Yeah. You go drink, and then you don't sleep as well. You might talk too much. You might make other mistakes.
Yes.
That would compound it. And
that is not going to lead down the road to coming back to work as a healthy person. I know most agencies around the world, they also, if their officers were involved in some sort of critical incident, they will also send them to mental health care professionals and get them the counseling and guidance that they'll need to overcome that.
Now, I'm going to guess at most agencies, that is exclusively for the officer themselves, not necessarily for the family. Although I think some agencies now provide a certain number of hours for family members. Is that?
Yes.
Okay.
As my own personal experiences have come, I realized that it's not just the officer that goes through a traumatic event. It's even more so the spouse goes through it. Guess who's listening to the story 1,000 times?
Yeah.
Guess who had to deal with, your odd behaviors and your change of your lifestyle afterwards? They go through that just as much, if not more so, than the actual officer, because the actual officer is getting all the attention afterwards.
And the actual officer had some agency in the event.
Yes.
Whether they did what they wanted to do or not, they had some agency. The spouse finds out hours later that their whole world almost ended.
Yes.
And they had no power, no agency, just completely helpless.
Yes. So, what I've done before is when I've had these follow-up meetings with healthcare professionals, I've brought my spouse with me.
Yes.
Saying, hey, what would help me go through this is I want to bring you into this as part of the healing process. Is it's not just me. It's not Keith going through this. Yeah. It's Keith and spouse going through this together. And we're going to overcome this event that we had to navigate.
Yeah, that seems, from a counselor's point of view, that strikes me as extraordinarily healthy.
Well, I guess I have a second life as a counselor.
Bringing the spouse in, inviting the spouse in to an appropriate amount of involvement, letting them be involved in getting healthier, not isolating yourself. I hate it when I see there's a certain range of cop personalities that when anything stressful happens, they isolate themselves. And I wish I could get them to do that less, because they would be better and healthier if they would be opening up to their family. A lot of times family does want to know a reasonable amount of what happened. They want to share in that. They don't want to see their loved one go through this by themselves. And so I wish they wouldn't isolate themselves, and inviting them in to go to counseling with me. Hey, I've got another appointment. Will you go with me? I think that's fantastic.
Yeah, that's after every event I've ever been in that was somewhat critical or mostly critical, I'm very open with her, and I'll call her and be like, "Hey, this is what just happened. I'm fine.
Right.
I'll be home later.
Yeah.
Hey, what's for dinner?"
No, people who know you've been a magnet for some of these things. You've had several events in your career, more than others, because not all cops do.
And that's a common misconception. Most people, they think, oh, every officer gets hired, they just want to go out there and run and gun and do all the crazy stuff. That's such a rarity.
Yeah.
Most of what we do is take reports.
Yeah. Yeah.
Hey, how was your accident report? Or hey, who broke your window?
Right.
Little things like that. That's what we do most of the time.
Right.
A small percentage of officers will be involved in a critical incident in their whole career.
Right. Right.
Most officers go the whole career and never get involved in a critical incident. But you're right. I've had the unlucky natural talent to put myself or find myself in bad situations.
Sure. So let me ask, again, thinking about afterward and dealing, maybe even years later, there's a thing that I actually had Officer London brought up to me one time. She had asked me about police voyeurism, where people, she says, you ought to talk about that on your podcast someday, about people wanting to in a very unpleasant way, they want to know, well, hey, officer, have you ever shot someone? And that's like they have this unhealthy interest in the worst day that you've maybe ever had on the job. Do you have any recommendations for officers how to deal with people like that? Just that are literally, you're at a dinner party and they want to know, have you ever shot somebody?
That is a very weird question to bring up at a dinner party. Hey, have you committed murder today?
Yeah. But there's people, they don't know law enforcement. They probably haven't ever sat down and talked to a cop that wasn't standing at their driver's side window, and so how do you just defer? Do you get sarcastic? Do you make a joke of it? Do you ignore them?
As much as I do that cops deal with stress by foul humor.
Yes.
Gallows humor, I think, is what I've heard you refer to it before.
Yes. Yeah.
So when my family asks, hey, how's work going? I see there's a lot of news stories in your city of people dying. I was like, well, business is booming.
Yes. Yeah. And it's dark. That's dark, but that's actually a pretty healthy way within certain contexts to deal with it. I encourage officers to talk that way, when they're at the police station. In roll call, hey, joke about it all you want. This is the safe place to do that. You get out on maybe social media, that's not the safe place to talk about it.
Social media is a whole nother topic.
Oh, they will crucify you for joking about it. Yeah.
So if someone ever asked me, hey, Keith, if you had involved in a shooting, I'd be like, it really depends on who that person is, if I'm going to open up to them or not.
Right. So it could be an opportunity to talk about the stresses of working in law enforcement, or they could just be the nosy neighbor that needs to go do something else. Yeah,
like I've got an 11-year-old kid. He doesn't even know half the stuff I've done at work. I keep what I do is pretty minimal. People know I am an officer, but I don't think they really need to know much more than that.
No. But sometimes you get that, and I liked what Officer London called it. She called it voyeurism, and there is a weird. People are fascinated. This is why they want to watch cop TV shows. Every cop TV show has to have a shootout in it.
Yeah. Oh yeah, of course.
Like they're literally like 1 year on the job, and this officer's been in like 25 shootouts.
Yeah. Why not?
Yeah, but that gives the wrong impression. And that wrong impression that's held culturally then puts a pressure on the officer. And, is what am I a good guy? Am I doing a moral job? And especially if they got into law enforcement to help people, that may be what's starting to affect them and keep them up at night and bother them after
Ask any officer why they got into law enforcement. What are they going to say?
Usually to help people.
I got in this job to help people. I think every single officer said that to their chief the day that they were hired.
That's a great interview question.
Yeah,
yes, I want to help people. Yeah.
I mean, the moral of it, at the end of it, is they wanted to help people. And you're right, though. Like after a certain amount of time, that it's hard to see what you've done to actually help people.
The topic of use of force by the police has a lot of moving parts. Both sides are in flux, second by second, and that's before you consider the legal, media, social, or psychological aspects of it. So I hope that this episode did two things for you. First, that you can overhear a discussion on police training and the use of force continuum so that you'll be better equipped to have that conversation with outsiders, whether it's the media, a nosy neighbor, or your own family. And second, that you can be encouraged about what you've experienced after a critical incident, that these responses are normal and expected, and that knowing that, you can have a better view of yourself and what kind of help, if any, you might need at this point. And thank you to Keith for sharing his wisdom and experience. If you want to hear Keith talk about law enforcement leadership, thinly disguised as a conversation about history books, then tune into episode 6, titled Read to Lead. On the next episode of Hey Chaplain, what are the different ways someone can die? Officially speaking.
Officially, when somebody dies, you have one of 5 choices. It's either a suicide, a homicide, an accident, undetermined, or natural.
So those are your 5 options, and conveniently, those 5 in that order spell out your name, Sean.
Turns out to be true.
So maybe you were predestined to be in medical investigations your whole life. You didn't know it, right?
Works in mysterious ways.
The views expressed here are the personal views of the host and our guest and do not necessarily represent the views of any law enforcement agency or its components. If you liked what you heard here, please share this episode with a cop or someone who loves a cop. Thank you for listening today, and as always, pray for peace in our city.